Within Module 2, we will explore the topics of cells, as well as the plasma membrane of cells. So the cell is the structural and functional unit of life. Cells are the smallest autonomous units of life, because the term autonomous implies that they are capable of controlling their own internal processes. And it is these cellular processes that are going to sustain life. So how well the entire organism functions is going to depend on the individual as well as the collective activity of all of the cells that compose that organism. Each cell within the body cannot be doing whatever it wants at any given time. So their collective activity is going to be carefully controlled and regulated by other systems in the body. Cell theory is the theory that states that all living things, at least that we know of on Earth, are composed of cells. And cell theory is supported by the fact that all of the living organisms that we have discovered so far are composed of cells. And we see that cells can only arise from other cells. The cell is quite small. The typical size of a cell is about 1/10,000th of an inch in diameter. Cells also have a wide variety of shapes because of the principle of complementarity, where we saw that function follows form. Cells have very specialized shapes that are going to fit their function or suit their function. So for example, cuboid and columnar cells in the upper left of this slide are going to function to absorb and secrete substances. Disc-shaped cells, such as red blood cells, are shaped because it gives them more surface area to carry oxygen. Muscle cells are long and thread-like, which is a property that we call fusiform, because muscle cells function to shorten and generate pulling forces. Nervous system cells that are called neurons are stellate, that is, they are star-shaped, because they function to signal and communicate with other cells and tissues. And finally, cells like squamous cells, which are flat and thin, function to protect or also function in absorption. The diversity of cell functions is reflected in the many varieties of cell shapes that we find in the body. There are approximately 200 different types of cells within the human body. Again, here, because there are not really many generalized cell types, we're going to see that most cells are specialized for one or a very few specific tasks. So rather than reviewing every single one of the 200 plus cell types in the body, let's instead look at the structures that are going to be common to most cells. Cells will generally have three components. They will generally have a nucleus, which contains the DNA of the cell. And cells have to go through a maturation process as they're being formed and created. And all cells will initially begin with a nucleus. However, some cells in the body, such as red blood cells, do not have a nucleus or are lacking a nucleus in their mature form. So we see that initially cells will begin with a nucleus, but they may lose it later in their life cycle. The cytosol is the fluid environment of the cell, and it also contains, suspended within it, these small structures called organelles. So all cells are filled with a gel-like material, gel-like fluid that's called cytosol, and suspended within that cytosol are the organelles, which are going to carry out very specific functions and very specific tasks in the cell. And finally, the third component is the plasma membrane. So all cells have a lipid barrier, that's referred to as the plasma membrane, that surrounds the entirety of the cell. The plasma membrane is going to function to separate the cell interior from the cell exterior. So the plasma membrane is essentially surrounded by two fluid-filled environments. We've got the fluid that is outside of the cell, which is referred to as the extracellular fluid. So this is the fluid that's located within our tissues, but outside of the plasma membrane of individual cells. And we also have the fluid that's inside the cell. That's referred to as the intracellular fluid, or as the cytosol, which we saw previously.